Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at first submission by Michaela of her horse Chi. Chi is a 4-year-old Hanoverian, and she's only started him about 5 weeks before this video, she says. So I think she's doing a great job so far. And what a beautiful horse he's going to be. Great to see him getting off to such a good start. So it's a good start off here in the walk. The biggest thing that I'd say throughout all of this is that you just need to work a little closer to the horse at times. Though he's stretching nicely and you're getting a good stretch in the trot, but sometimes your slack is just, there's too much slack in the rein, and it takes you a little while to get him to respond a little bit. But he's doing beautifully, though, having said that. So all I'm suggesting is that if you've done a little work in hand, which I would have loved to have seen a little bit of that as well, maybe next time, the idea is once we teach them to work in hand, then we can get a little closer to them on the lunge line and begin to get some of the same effects. That is, to get them to yield the hindquarters a little bit to the outside so that we can engage that inside hind leg. It's just like with here, you have a very slack line. I'd like to see you working a little closer. I like the fact that you're keeping on a big circle, but I want to see you walk a little more with it yourself, which makes a little more effort. But then you can stay a little closer to him. And while this is not bad here, it's just that we'd like to see a little more swing in the walk. It's a little bit slow and under impulse. So we'd like to begin to encourage a little bigger walk as we can. And as I said, if you get a little closer to him while you're doing this, so that you can, like right here, you're a little bit ahead of his eye. We want to stay at that configuration where we're creating a triangle that's formed by the lunge line and the lunge whip. So just here, what I would like to see you do is bring him a little closer to you, or for you to walk a bigger circle if you can then. And just try to activate his hindquarters a little bit more when you're getting this. Now, having said that, you're getting some good work out of him, but in order to maximize your time, so to speak, we'd like to try to ask a little more of him. Now, I see that you have the side reins and surcingle on here, but at no time in this video do you actually put those on. So you might be interested in the next one to see how he's responding to that. But you're certainly doing a good job. I like how he's stretching into it. I like how relaxed he is. And when you get into the trot work, he's really a very beautiful mover. And when you get the stretch, it's looking really good. So that's starting to increase a little bit, getting a little better step. But you see my point if you were just to shorten that line a little bit. So we want to not have a big slack in the rein all the time. Now this is a nice calm young horse, but part of that reason is with some horses that are a little more fractious than this one is, if they have a little too much slack in the rein, they can take off. And once again, if they have all that slack in the rein, they can pull you right off their feet. So we want to, just like when we ride, we don't, unless we're hacking out on a loose rein, we usually like to keep the slack out of the rein so that we can continue to communicate with the horse. So that being the idea, you can see that when that rein is as slack as it becomes, you're not really keeping contact with him. But as I said, he is starting to stretch down pretty nicely, but we'd like that walk to swing a lot more than it's doing now, and you can encourage that by getting a little closer to him. You have a very beautiful arena there. It looks like you have Faerber in your arena, if that's what it is, which is good outdoor footing. Tends to break down quite a bit. I used to have it in one arena at my farm in Kentucky. We had a big storm and it all floated away. But I was very fortunate when I lived there, in that the Faerber place where they made it was right around the corner from me, so it was only $20 or something for an entire truckload of it. Probably a lot less than you paid, but it looks good. Looks like you have good footing, and of course that's so important to horses. We see some people, starting their horses out in fields and things like that, which I did very many times myself as young, as we never had riding arenas when I was young. The only time we ever rode in arenas when we went to horse shows. But, the grass and things like that, uneven. We want the horse to really trust the footing so it will give itself up and give us the most movement. Where, if you ever watch horses when they're on rocky sort of ground, they pick their way through it if they're smart enough to know what it is, because they don't want to hurt their feet. So it's always very important that we have good footing to start them on so that they feel comfortable and don't hold back, if you will. So same thing here, you could just be getting more out of this walk by getting closer to him, taking the slack out of the line, and just trying to encourage with your whip a little longer, more active step. Very beautiful horse, though. I look forward to seeing you. You're definitely off to a good start, and it's so nice when we start babies like my wife's new young one, who I'm sure you guys have all seen online there, Q. When you start with one that hasn't been damaged, this work goes so much quicker. As I say, most young horses, like you see even this one, even though you're not making that big an effort in terms of staying close to him, trying to work with him, he's still wanting to stretch really nicely and getting to that almost on his own, if you will. But when we want to encourage a little deeper stretch, what we always have to do is, remember, we're always trying to get them to engage that inside hind leg so they begin to push up through the back. So that's why we try to get them to yield the hindquarters a little bit so that we can at least get both ends of the horse on the same circle. You'll see with this one, when he comes around every now and then, because you're not keeping the slack out of the rein like here, he's just kind of drifting in a straight line at times. So he's making more of a square than he's making a circle. And see how here he's got his head to the outside and the hindquarters are very much to the inside. As soon as you take a little contact right there, then he starts to stretch better into it. But we'd like to see, there you go. Now it's starting to look, and notice how his head begins to drop, how even for that couple of seconds there, all of a sudden the hind end started to engage a little more and you got a little more swing in the walk, which is what we'd like to get to. He has a lovely natural rhythm. That is, he's not just speeding around you. Looks like a really nice guy. I've trained a lot of Hanoverians in the past, and they tend to be very nice-minded horses. So same thing, as he goes around here, you can see he's just kind of holding his body straight and sort of turning square corners, if you will, rather than really working on a circle. So once again, you don't want to just take that slack out, bring him a little closer to you, and once they start to stretch, then let them out onto the bigger circle. You see, once again there, see it kind of counterflexes to the outside. Though he does get into a good stretch here in a few moments. As I say, most of the young ones will do that. See how that line is on the ground there? Now see, well, I'm glad to see you doing something about it there. You lift it up a little bit and try to get him out away from you. But, you know, don't be shy about bringing him in a little closer to you to get him a little more activated. And once again, then you let him out onto the bigger circle. But good there once he starts to stretch. That's starting to look like something. And notice that as soon as he starts to stretch, all of a sudden we see a little more flexion in the hocks. We see a little more bounce in the horse, so to speak, which tells me that the thrust of the hind legs is starting to lift the front end off the ground a little bit, which is what we want to have happen. That's really nice there as he starts to get into that. And once again, just try to keep the slack a little more out of the rein. But what a beautiful horse this is going to be, and is already. And watch as he releases. So there's where you'd want to just take that slack out, bring him just a little bit closer so you're working with a little more contact. And of course, this also gets the horse used to the idea of working in contact once we're riding. That's really nice there. So this is all going really well, even without you making a big effort to try to get it. He's getting there pretty much on his own here. So right there is where, once they start to cut in, the best thing to do is bring them in to you a little bit closer till they want to move out away from you. And then they start to engage that inside hind leg. You start to see the back lift a little more and the stretch get a little bit deeper. Then we let them on the larger circle. Same thing there, you want to more quickly take up that slack when you see it on the ground like that. As I said, once again, this is a nice-minded horse who's not trying to take off with you or anything, but that becomes important, and just for safety, if nothing else. If we get too much slack on the ground like you have right there, or they start to take off, they can easily get a leg over the line, and then you've got a real problem on your hands. But that's looking better now. Notice how the hocks are starting to work in a round or circle. We're starting to see a little more bounce, and look how that neck is totally releasing. So he's doing absolutely beautiful. And as I said, like most young horses, it isn't hard to get them to stretch if nobody has kept them from stretching. Most horses, unfortunately, today go into some kind of training. People immediately start trying to alter the frame and to make them look like they're going Grand Prix at 3 years old, which of course is impossible. Of course, it is always interesting nowadays to look at the age difference. 20 years ago, the average age of a horse at the Olympic Games was 15, 16 years old. Now it's 9 years old. But we see how much more quickly all these horses are going down the tubes. It's very alarming to think that people nowadays kind of have an idea that horses are going to last for 2 years and you're going to buy a new one. Well, that's sad all the way around for the horses and for the riders as well, as it takes 2 years just to really get a good basics on a horse where they're really starting to work with you and really trying for you rather than just trying to make them do things. In the immortal words of Bill Steinkraus, it's always better if we can get them to like it. And they really start to work with us. Now, this is not a bad canter. He's such a nice balanced horse. I wouldn't do a lot of that yet, but that was enough to get him a little more active. Of course, he's cantering there, no big deal for a young horse. But he's such a nice balanced horse with 3 really good gaits from what I see here. So that's a good enough canter that you can do some of it. Sometimes when we start young horses, especially big ones, they can be so disorganized in the canter that there really is no point in doing it. In other words, if the canter isn't pretty much about the way this one is, which is at least cantering over his back with a regular canter and he can balance in the canter, then you can do it. So it all depends. They're all a little bit different. But the rule of thumb, if they can do it and stay relaxed and stay over the back, then it's perfectly fine to do it at whatever age they are or however long in the process. You'll get some horses once in a while that can canter fantastically in one direction and the other direction can't canter at all. So that means in the one direction you can do a little more canter, and the other one you'd want to stay away from it more and build more strength in the trot, getting the horse to lift its back, and then you'll find that the two sides will begin to look even. Remember that that's how we straighten horses, by getting them to lift their back. There is no other way to get a horse to be straight. You can spend your life trying to line up the front end in front of the back end, but if the back is not lifting, they're never really going to be straight, and you'll end up trying to hold them straight, which of course is kind of impossible. You will always feel like you've got something underneath you that's trying to squirm out of your hands, if you will. But really good job with him, and that's about the right amount of canter if you're going to do it, that we do just a few times around at this stage. Remember, this horse is only 4 years old, so he's still got he looks quite mature, but that doesn't mean that they are. Horses grow until they're 8 years old. The slow growth really slows down at 5 or 6 or so, but they are continuing to mature, just like human beings might. You might have your full... I've been the same height since I was 13 years old, 6'2", but it wasn't until I was well in my 20s that I had some muscle on that frame, because I was very tall and thin. So it takes time. Really nice walk here. Now this walk is looking much, much better. I like how deep the stretch is, and he's more picking up his hind legs and bringing them forward rather than just kind of dragging them along. So that's a much better walk you're getting there. And once again, I like how you're a little closer to him here at this point. Really nice neck. Now that's really looking nice. And just remember, there is no such thing, no matter what people around you may tell you, though you look like you're well on your own out there, and with lots of distance around you, so maybe you don't have too many people telling you what you ought to be doing. But one of the worst things about riding in a public place is that, if you're not doing exactly what the trainer there might be doing, you'll find a great deal of resistance and people questioning constantly what you're doing and trying to give you advice on how you can do it better by forcing the horse into some frame or other, because that's all they know. But you can see if you've only started this horse 5 weeks ago, so what a beautiful development he already has. Developing nice and calmly, getting him stretching into the contact. Everything looks like it's going just really well here with this horse. So I try to tell my students as well, if you're in a public place, don't also try to preach this to other people. Let them see your horses improve and develop, and let them come to you and ask you why is your horse looking so good. Then you tell them. So again, here's a place where once again you'd like to take up that slack a little bit. The walk kind of slowed down. It's more back like it was before, a little more of a crawl. But here you're activating them a little bit, and it starts to swing a little better. So keep watching those hind legs for the activity. You see how now it's kind of slowing down. There's almost no flexion in his hocks anymore. He's just kind of dragging his back end along, and you can see it's kind of starts stabbing the front legs. Remember, horses can either propel themselves forward with their hind legs, or they can drag themselves forward by their front end. And that's what we always are trying to decipher, which they are doing. But development comes quite quickly once we can really get them to begin to engage over their back, as you've done with this one. And as I said, you've already found that young horses stretch quite easily. And conversely, but if you have an older horse, we just have to take the time. If they've been upside down for 10 years, going hollow, they're not going to just turn right around and suddenly be fantastic. Now, some of them do once in a while. We're lucky, like you saw the videos of that little horse, Gemini, that we had at the barn there for a while. It was a polo pony, very upside down. It took me probably an hour to get the horse to stretch the first time, but once it did, that's all it needed to know. It was as happy as clam, has gone home now, is working beautifully. So they're all a little different. But we always have to look at what their body looks like when we're starting. When someone brings me an older horse, look at the top line. Is there a top line? Are they already sinking through the back? So it's so wonderful we can start with nice young horses like you have here. And this is actually a very easy process, because even though your lunging technique here could be a little better in that you could stay a little closer to him and keep the slack out of the line a little more, ask him to yield the hindquarters a little bit. So in your next video, I'd love to see a little work in hand to see if you're making any progress with that, which is also part of the process with the young horses. But very often with the babies, I don't start work in hand until I get them first on the lunge line just stretching. And of course, they have to be carrying a bit in their mouth and this sort of thing and be used to that before you can start that process. But with the babies, it usually is not so difficult because, as I said, like with this one, if you just start lunging them, most of them will stretch out all by themselves. So really good beginning here, and those moments that you really had him stretch there in the trot, he's looking really good. Right here, once again, you need to be closer to the horse, a little more active. See, once again, it's just kind of, there's not much flexion in those hocks. He's not picking up those hind legs as well as he was before. We lost a little bit of the stretch. So you can just be doing a little more to get it back to where you want it to be, rather than just kind of waiting for it to come around, if you will. So same thing here, you want to take that slack. So you're kind of getting ahead of his eye a little bit, which tends to slow him down. So you want to be a little closer, a little more behind him, so to speak, so you can keep those hindquarters active. But he's really going to be a beautiful horse. Look forward to seeing your next video. It'll be interesting to see with your next one, if you put those side reins on, to see how he responds to that. Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Look forward to seeing you again. Great job.